I'm John Lewis, and I'm director of the Goals for Dallas program. Let me ask you a question. Who is going to provide the leadership to guide our community throughout this decade? According to John Naisbitt, the author of Megatrends and an advisor to many of America's leading corporations, the answer is that you are. Each of us must accept at least some of the responsibility. This is but one of the trends affecting Dallas and all communities. These are important trends to be aware of when thinking about the needs of the Dallas area and the specific community goals required to deal with our needs. Trends changing our lives was John Naisbitt's topic when he addressed a preparatory conference in April of 1983 that kicked off a new Goals for Dallas process designed to meet the challenges in our community in the decade of the 1980s.
I think that Goals for Dallas is really a very uplifting enterprise, and I've very much enjoyed my time with you. I think it's really, for the rest of us around the country, inspiring what you're doing. And it certainly has a lot to do with this new participatory democracy that we're well into. You know, we created a representative democracy a couple of hundred years ago when we needed it. And we sent our representatives off to Washington, or we sent them off to Austin, and they represented us, and then they came back and told us what went on, and we voted them up or down. And now, with instantaneously shared information, we know as much as they do as soon as they do. And we don't really need that kind of representativeness anymore. And that has interesting implications. And it has to do with why we're convening today. And it has to do with this whole participatory democracy notion that's moving to every corner of the society. And let me just suggest to you a key question in connection with a participatory democracy. And this has to do with you, whether you're dealing with your kids or your spouse or your associates or a company with its employees or stockholders or a country and its citizens. And that the key question is, are the people whose lives are affected by a decision part of the process of arriving at a decision? Not necessarily that they prevail, but are they part of a process of arriving at a decision? And I suppose that would be one way of talking about Goals for Dallas. And let me just say, as we decentralize leadership even more, as we become more participatory in our democracy, that there's something that we almost always forget. And that is that strong leadership is anathema to a democracy. You know, we as a people, in times of crisis, we elect a Lincoln or an FDR, and in between we elect what's his name. You remember at the end of Eisenhower's term, the great crack was that Truman showed us that anyone could be president, and Eisenhower showed us that no one had to be president. But I would insist on this because the whole point is that it's the system that's important. It's the system that we hold dear. Now the secret, in turn, is that they don't know. You know, we say, what are they going to do about it? The truth is that they don't know. And the other part of that is that each of us is responsible for what happens to Dallas or this world. And I wonder what would happen if each of us in this room took personal responsibility for the future of Dallas and acted on that. I suggest that it would resemble a miracle if there were enough citizens in this city who would take that personal responsibility. And as we move into cycle 3, let me suggest that that's a very important thing to do, because cycle 2 was a long time ago, and cycle 1 was a very long time ago, in the sense that the world has been changing dramatically, as I tried to underscore last night. And with the world changing so much, we have to reconceptualize again and again. Reconceptualize what Dallas is, reconceptualize what our role in this society is. Lastly, I would say that it's important, at least it's important to me, and I think to all of us, to notice as we move into next year, that the scenario, the Orwellian scenario of 1984, we've turned really upside down. That 1984 scenario of big brother, of centralized government, of top-down state running all of our lives, what's happening in America is the exact opposite of that. That we citizens are running and controlling our lives, and I should think that Dallas is perhaps our prime example of that. I congratulate you for that, and I think that's something to celebrate. Thank you.
Very good.
Leadership, as we make these great transitions, is coming not from Washington, it's coming from Dallas, it's coming from San Antonio with Henry Cisneros, it's coming from Florida with Bob Graham. The leadership for the new directions is clearly local in this country as we decentralize. What's happening is that our general purpose instrumentalities are folding everywhere. Our kind of general purpose umbrellas are folding everywhere. And in Megatrends, I use the analog of the folding of the great general purpose magazines, Life, Look, and Post, with their 10 million circulations. They folded 10 years ago, on the same year. That year we created 300 special interest magazines, 300 or 400 or 500 the next year. We now have more than 13,000 special interest magazines and no general purpose magazines, but that's an analog for the whole society. Those top-down, centralized instrumentalities out of New York City, ABC, NBC, and CBS, I think, will become the Life, Look, and the Post of the 80s, as their great audiences are drained away by all of these new options in this increasingly multiple option society. You know, the cable stations where you can tune in to Runner's World or Beehive Management or whatever, and all among the options and all of the new cable networks. We now have 60 or 62 cable networks. Last week, the Disney cable network went online. 2 weeks ago was Nashville. Last summer, Health Network. We have a number of Spanish language networks. We have religious networks. We have all sports networks, all news networks, all weather networks. We have 2 children's networks. We have the gavel-to-gavel coverage of House of Representatives, which of course makes 3 children's networks. My own sense of it is that ABC, NBC, and CBS will, just by the end of this decade, lose more than half of the viewers they have today, while at the same time the number of viewers will have increased. Notice, too, how we're decentralizing leadership. And this goes with what I said about where the initiative is coming. Decentralizing leadership in America, you have to only think about it for a bit. If you look around you, ask, where are all the great captains of industry? They're not there anymore. The great university presidents, save the one who introduced me tonight, the great leaders in the arts. There are no more great civil rights leaders, great labor leaders, great political leaders. Why is that? It's because we followers are not creating those kinds of leaders anymore, and followers create leaders, period. In the analog, we're creating leaders along much narrower bands and much closer proximity. If you think about the old Taoist model of leadership, where you find a parade and get in front of it, what's happening in America today is that those parades are getting smaller and smaller, and the other part of it is, of course, there are many more of them. Leadership is being decentralized in America today, and think about this, you are the new leadership in America today. Now, in the new economy, there's a shift from institutional help to self-help. After World War II in the 50s, we seem to have turned our souls over to the corporations, our health over to the medical establishment, our kids over to the schools, and our welfare over to government. And now we're reclaiming these, and what's occurring is a kind of old-fashioned self-reliance in this country. Now also, while there be many opportunities in the new economy in all parts of the country, most of the action will be in 3 great megastates. And to many of my clients, depending on what line of work they're in, I often will tell them they ought to have an FTC policy. Florida, Texas, and California. Because in just these 3 great megastates, as much as 65% of the population growth momentum As much as 65% of the economic growth momentum is occurring. So you're well situated. And I said in the book that we're moving from north to south, and it is true that there are more people living in the south today for the first time in American history than living in the north. But that's really a shorthand. What's really happening is the movement is to the southwest and Florida, not the south. And by the southwest, I mean the southwest quadrant of the United States. You draw a line across the top of California, the top of Nevada, top of Utah, top of Colorado, and drop down and pick up Texas. That southwest quadrant plus Florida accounts for about 85% of the population growth momentum and the economic growth momentum. I thought I may have overstated that somewhat and been a little too bold about that in the book until I read 5 weeks ago the report of the U.S. Census Bureau on the growth since the 1980 census. They were reporting on 1981 and 1982. The population in this country increased 5 million. And 92% of that growth the U.S. Census Bureau reported occurred in the South and the West. Incredible momentum. What's happening, and something for you to think about in this improbably located city, is that in the new economy, the ground for economic development competition has shifted. In the old industrial period, when we want to locate a facility, we look for the infrastructure, for the water and the transportation and the resources. But in the new economy, where we can put a facility wherever we want, we look not for the infrastructure, we look for the quality of life. We look for the ambiance. We look for the climate. We look for the quality of education. We look for the cultural offerings and even the sports offerings. And I think you're very well situated here. And it's true, Jan, that I didn't name Dallas, because you're quite right. When I named those 10 new cities of great opportunity, a number of them in Texas and all of them in the Southwest and Florida, I was looking for the Dallases of the future and the Miamis of the future. You are very well positioned with your quality of life, and it seems to me for economic development that what you emphasize is the quality of life, and what you work on is the quality of life. Importantly, the quality of education in this community. Now, in the new economy, we're going to use less energy. What many of us missed was that the energy and thirsty industrial base is going away, and the energy-intensive industrial base has been using 1/4 of our energy. Last year in the United States, for the first time in our history, we used less electricity than the year before. Last year, for the 4th consecutive year, we used less oil than the year before. So you put that, the decline of the energy-intensive industrial base with the conservation that's going on, with the alternative energy sources that's going on, and I think you get no energy crisis in the new economy. Now lastly, in the new economy, we're moving in the dual directions of what I call high-tech, high-touch, which Jan referred to. And the idea there is, just as he stated it, that the more technology we put in the society, the more we create kind of counterballast, human counterballast, in order to be able to handle dealing with technology. For example, the introduction in this society of television was accompanied by first the group therapy movement, led to the personal growth movement, led to the human potential movement, very widespread. Those two things, television and the human potential movement, developed almost in lockstep. The pill is a good example of high-tech, high-touch, where we had the high technology of chemistry and pharmacology. We created a pill, which then led to a whole revolution in lifestyles. And notice here, too, we went from either or to multiple option. You're getting ahead of me. So, when I was growing up, it was either or. You either got married or you didn't get married. Now, as I get it, there are an array of possibilities, including living together, which is very widespread. But marriage is coming back. Marriage is coming back in the 80s, not for all of us, but it's one of those options. It's coming back, though, unlike the 70s, during which there were days that I, at least, was absolutely sure that the only people who really wanted to get married in this society were priests. If you remember those days. Heart transplants and brain scanners were, the high-tech of those was accompanied by a new interest, a renewed interest in the neighborhood clinic and the family doctor. Jet airplanes, as far as I can tell, have led only to more meetings. Have you noticed how the high technology of the introduction of the high technology of word processing into our offices has led to revival of handwritten notes and letters? When I was a very young person growing up in a very tiny town in southern Utah, the really big deal was to get a typewritten letter, and you go around and you show it to everybody. And we've really gone full cycle because the really big deal now is the high touch of a handwritten note or letter in this world of high technology. Another example, a very poignant example, is life-sustaining equipment in hospitals. We couldn't handle all that high technology into such a sensitive area without creating some human ballast, so we got really interested in the quality of death. Led to the hospices movement, which is very widespread, at least 1,000 hospices in this society, at least one in every state. On our factory floors, we have high-tech, high-touch. The high-tech of robots and the high-touch of quality circles, and the more robots, the more quality circles. The point is that the more technology you put into a society, the more people look for ways to aggregate, to go to movies, to go to restaurants, to go to shopping centers, and so on. And I think it's in this context that the scenario of the electronic cottage will not go very far. It's not either or, it is multiple option, but not many of us are going to be willing to sit by our computers and tap out messages to the office. Most of us want to go to the office. Most of us want to be with people. And the more technology you put in the society, the more you want to be with people. Sitting home and tapping out messages to the office is okay for emergencies, like Mondays. But surely from Tuesday to Friday we'll want to be with people. And I think another thing that's happening, and something to think about in connection with Goals for Dallas, is that I'm beginning to see all the markings of a renaissance in the arts and literature in this society. And that's not surprising with the incredible amount of high-tech, the computers and the satellites, as we do the counterbalance of re-examining our humanity, all the really heavy questions about why are we here and so forth, because that's where we explore that in the arts and literature. And I see a renaissance in this, and given the decentralization of this society that's taking place, of course, all of this will occur way, way off Broadway. Lastly, in connection with the computers, I now see the computer as liberator. And let me give you a couple examples. If you've had, or if companies had 400 people working for them, or 400,000 people, those employees have been treated pretty much the same for decades, because that's how you keep track of them. But with a computer to keep track, you can have a different arrangement. You can have, in fact, a unique arrangement with each of 400 or 400,000 employees, and that's the direction it's going. Also, I think the computer is going to smash the pyramid. We created this hierarchical managerial pyramid hundreds of years ago because we needed it to keep track of people and the things they did. It served us extraordinarily well. It's also very anti-productive. And with the computer to keep track, we can reconstitute our institutions along much more horizontal lines, smaller and smaller units, more participatory units, more entrepreneurial units, all the things that fit in with the new trends, and that's the direction it's going. I think we have to see the computer as a tool that manages complexity. And just as surely as those highways out there just encourage more cars, when you have a tool that manages complexity, you invite more complexity into the society. And we're creating, and will create, an incredibly complex, multiple option society because we can keep track of it with the computer. As I've said, in the end, or as we go along here, those of us who are going to be most successful are going to be trilingual. We're going to be fluent in English, Spanish, and computer. What happens is that man creates tools, and then those tools shape man, and I think in the end, none so profoundly as the computer. Now, before summarizing, let me just say that I think that as we get deeper into the new economy, the question for the 80s is, what business are you really in? And by that I mean you personally, you and your profession, this city, what business are we really in? And because we're erasing all the lines that used to draw the neat little boxes. This is a bank, this is a utility, this is Sears, and so on. And the question of the 80s is, what business are we really in? The law of the situation, which is known as the law of the situation. The law of the situation was created by the first management consultant in the United States in 1904, Mary Parker Follett. Mary Parker Follett had a window shade company as a client, and she very carefully explained to this window shade company it would be a good idea to reconceptualize itself as a light control company, opening up lots of options and moving away from the earlier narrow purpose. Everybody in this room knows, in this auditorium knows, that the railroad should have known they were in the transportation business rather than the railroad business. But I think the new example is banks. And I use banks because what's happening to banks is happening to all of us. It's just very clear when we look at banks, because banks got caught between inflation and electronics, and they woke up one morning and everyone seemed to be in the banking business paying 2 or 3 times more money than they were able to pay. If banks don't reconceptualize what business they're in, and they're doing it, some of them, they're going to be out of business. And last year there were 48 bank failures. And when I was that young man growing up in Utah, bank failures meant the end of the world, more or less. But today, bank failures only mean bank failures because there are banking services all around us. Insurance companies with a 30-year fixed rate, the death of the 30-year fixed rate loan, they have to reconceptualize what business they're in, or they will be out of business. Everybody has to do that. But you know, I look around me and I see companies, institutions, I see cities that are like dinosaurs, waiting for the weather to change. The weather is not going to change. The very ground is shifted beneath us. And as I said earlier, things are not going to get better. Things are going to have to get different. And one of the things that impresses me so much about the history of Goals for Dallas is this constant process of reconceptualizing. That's not understood in many of the cities. You know, I talked earlier about the shift from infrastructure to ambiance. It's going to be very tough for the cities of the Midwest and Northeast to survive, for the Eries and the Scrantons and the Buffaloes and the Clevelands. If Cleveland goes on being Cleveland, Cleveland will not survive over time. Cleveland has to reconceptualize what Cleveland is. And again, what this process here so impresses me, as I said, is that this is a process of constantly, given the changes in the world, of constantly reconceptualizing what Dallas is as you continue to move in this search for excellence. So the law of the situation is when the situation changes, we have to reconceptualize what business we're in, or conceptualize what business it would be useful for us to think we're in. And that, of course, as you're demonstrating, is a constant process. But also part of this, and another thing that you've talked about, and that shared vision you're driving for, I think that's so important. I think strategic planning, for example, is worthless without a strategic vision. And let me just remind you of a very interesting strategic vision. And that was the one that President Kennedy gave NASA when he said, we are going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The powerful clarity of that mind picture almost magnetically organized everything, every step of the way to get there. Suppose President Kennedy has said, we are going to have the best space program in the world, which organizes nothing. But notice that that's what most strategic visions sound like. We're going to be the biggest. We're going to be the best. We have to work to have clarity on our strategic vision, and as you have emphasized so much, that absolutely must be a shared strategic vision. It must be a participatory strategic vision. So let me just summarize, in connection with this larger context in which you're dealing with Goals for Dallas, let me summarize by listing the many ways that we're changing in this very basic transition, and reminding all of us, again, of course, that in all of these great changes we have a choice. We can either be victims of these great changes, or we can make these great changes work for us. And I take it that's why we're here today, to make these great changes work for us. It's not multiple option, it's not either or, it is multiple option, but even so, on balance, as we shift from the old economy to the new, America is restructuring from an industrial society to an information society, from a centralized society to a decentralized society, from north to south, from a national economy to part of an integrated global economy, from forced technology to high-tech, high-touch, from either or to multiple option, from physics to biology, from economies of scale to appropriate scale, from a managerial society to an entrepreneurial society, from institutional medicine to personal responsibility, from sickness orientation to wellness orientation, from hierarchies to networking, from representative democracy to, as you've demonstrated so well, participatory democracy, from short-term to long-term, from printing to telecommunications, from broadcasting to narrowcasting, from department stores and chain stores to boutiques, from the family as the basic unit to the individual as the basic unit, from party politics to issue politics, from a machismo society to an androgynous society, the 11th megatrend, by the way, from federal assistance to community enterprise, from macroeconomics to microeconomics, from quantitative information to qualitative knowledge, from the myth of the melting pot to a celebration of cultural diversity, from material productivity to knowledge productivity, from hired labor to contract labor, from institutional help to self-help, from a left versus right politics to a politics of the radical center, from conquerors of nature to partnership with nature, from a vertical society to a horizontal society, and from a top-down society to a bottom-up society. I've said that we are living in the time of the parenthesis, the time between eras. We haven't quite left the old industrial era that served us so magnificently for so long. We're not yet quite up to speed in the new information electronics era. In this time of the parenthesis, the time between eras. And the time of the parenthesis is a great and yeasty time. It's a time of great change. It's a time of great uncertainty, and we've got to make uncertainty our friend. And, of course, it's a time of great opportunity. Just think about it. In stable eras, everything has a name, and everything knows its place, and you and I can leverage very little. But in the time of the parenthesis, we have extraordinary leverage. We have extraordinary influence individually, professionally, and institutionally if we can just get a clear sense, if we can just get a clear vision of the road ahead. And that's why I say it's a fantastic time to be alive. Thank you very much.
In the very early stages of planning for Cycle 3, Goals for Dallas, several of us had a discussion about how we would like for this activity to be. What would it be like? What would be our choice, our priority? And one of the things we talked about is that it could be fun. And it doesn't have to be drudgery to work on this project. And I just want you to know, John, that you were the perfect initial speaker. You were informative and stimulating, but you were fun, and we appreciate you. Let's proceed to have more fun. We're going into a situation now where we'll have three panelists, whom I'll introduce in a moment, who will have a discussion with John. After a short period, then we will have some cordless microphones on the stairways, and you will be invited to engage John for a period, and then after that we'll have a reception and have a chance to visit with him personally. But right now I want to introduce on my immediate left Ray Lewis, who's Director of Communications Planning for Diamond Shamrock Corporation. To his left, Barbara Maturka, President of the Dallas League of Women Voters, and Randy Ratliff, at the far left, Executive Director, Greater Dallas Community Relations Commission. And I'm going to step down here and let the panelists talk.
This on? I got elected to make the first comment, ask the first question. Believe me, it had nothing to do with quality. I happen to have this seat. My comment, I would just like to underscore your comments about the mismatch between schooling and our needs. I probably would guess that's shared by most everybody in this room. Question. You talk about the shift of government involvement from Washington into state and local government. And yet I'm hearing on a number of the other trends working together that says something even further than that, at the risk of God forbid paraphrasing Karl Marx, as the means of information are more and more controlled by individuals, by the people, there seems to be an indication that involvement of government of any kind will, quote, wither away, or at least certainly get much smaller. That there's an implication there in a lot of what you said. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't know if it will wither away. It seems clear to me that Washington and the Congress will be less and less important as we move along. It'll become kind of largely ceremonial, like the royalty of England. Of course, that's the only thing that works in England, so I don't know. But I think the important shift, I think we will always, govern ourselves, but I think the really important shift here is from Washington to the states and localities. And on this question of education, just to keep it in that context, I think all of the initiatives will come, and they are coming locally. And we're entering into a period of a lot of experimentation and change in education. It seems to me that you get change in the society when you have a confluence of changing values and economic necessity. And we're moving into such a crunching economic necessity as we move into global competition that I foresee a lot of change in our educational system. I think the Commission on Excellence in Education report that came out just yesterday is the Rising Tide of Mediocrity that I mentioned is a very strong report, but simply mirrors what everybody knows. I was in San Diego 3 or 4 Saturdays ago and talked to 6,000 school administrators from the state of California, and I said there what I said to you, that I think what happened is that we've been asking less and less of our students, and they've been giving us less and less, and now it's catching up with us, and I thought that might be pretty tough medicine, and I got a terrific round of applause for that. Everybody seems to know that, and now we're starting to really act on that. And we're going to act on it not top down out of Washington. We're going to act on it locally.
Well, I'd like to say first, I think a lot of what Mr. Naisbitt has said has been rather reassuring to some of us in Dallas. It was reassuring to me, first of all, that he talked about going from hierarchies to participatory democracy, because the League of Women Voters has been preaching that for over 60 years now. And it's nice to know that we're going
the world is catching
in the
up.
right direction, like Ronald Reagan. And perhaps that's why we have survived as long as we have. I think it's also reassuring to read about how important networking is becoming, because Dallas is doing many things along those lines, and I think one thing we have going for us on the subject of education, which has already been brought up, is that we have a very fine community network for public education already set up in this city. It came about at the time of the desegregation order, and it was first called Committee for the Smooth Transition. And it has evolved into groups of organizations all over the city working together to help education in general, public education. And it includes business and industry, it includes religious groups, it includes realtors, youth services, PTAs, and so on, just down the line. But I still see that education is one of the greatest challenges to Dallas. And if you read yesterday morning's newspaper, or this morning's, you saw the sad facts about where we stand. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we have to do as far as participating in goals for Dallas.
Could I say something about that, Barbara? If I call you Barbara, will you call me John? That's very high touch. Let me suggest something about what you've just said about Dallas with Florida. Florida is, I think I've talked about California as being a great bellwether state and Florida being number 2, and it's catching up. Florida is a really state to watch because it's got a incredibly very economically dynamic state, which rests mostly on the new economy. It's our great face, along with Texas, to the incredible markets of the 80s and 90s to the south of us. It has a demographic profile that's the same that will be the rest of the country in 1995. That's why it's a bellwether. But the only thing that could arrest California's great growth is that, Florida's, is that Florida has top to bottom a second-rate educational system. And I've talked to people about that there and talked with Governor Graham, and what they're talking about as an economic strategy in the years ahead, to put all of their energies into upgrading their educational system top to bottom. That has to do with what I talked about earlier about quality of life and so forth, and that is not a bad strategy, and that's kind of what you're suggesting.
Well, and I think that's one of our problems here. We have not been willing to put the number of dollars into our educational system that we need to. And I think we have other challenges that you've mentioned. One of them has to do with the growth problem and what it does to the infrastructure. And we're still dealing with it in Dallas. We're not very far along with it, as a matter of fact. We are trying to pass a referendum this summer that will help our transportation system. But that's just one factor, and I think that's one of the things Goals for Dallas is going to have to deal with very seriously. As for questions, I think my question would be, will we continue to have much in the way of a volunteer movement? Are there going to be enough people with enough time to devote? We've seen in the women's movement, for example, that so many women are now involved in their own careers that the women's volunteer time has dwindled considerably. And I think that's true, generally speaking. What do you see as the future of volunteerism?
Not only because they've gone into careers, but because women have decided that they're not going to give their labor that freely as they had so much in the past. And it was a little unfair and a little sexist and so on. So I think that's catching up as well. Well, there's several levels on that. I don't think that in the old sense that the volunteerism, as you're suggesting, is going down in the old framework, but I think that volunteerism and initiatives of individuals as citizens of the society is going up. And that's a very different thing, though, to be active citizens. And there's very few places in this country, Minneapolis being one of them, where the citizens are as active and responsible as they are in Dallas. But I think that is increasing around the country, but in that new sense rather than the old sense of women volunteering for swell things.
Goals for Dallas has, since its inception, has been a very particularly extraordinary kind of a program. I was hoping when I came here tonight to see indications that Goals would have the same high level of goals and ideals that it has always had. And I thank you, John, for putting us in that frame of mind. I feel very safe about phase 3 of the Goals for Dallas because it maintains a very high idealistic level, yet at the same time it opens itself to the problems that exist in this country, and particularly in Dallas. I am well assured that phase 3 will tackle the problems of this city in a very forward, strong, open kind of a way, that there would be no subject pushed aside that need attention. The Goals has made a very strong impact on me and on a lot of people that I know. And I'm sure that phase 3 will be the same, because tonight's keynote address, is that what we want to call it, was terrific. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Randy.
I just want to pick up one before we go to the audience. There's a great deal of talk about the importance of computer awareness, computer literacy, and a little talk about perhaps the cost of implementing that. How do you see, in within this framework of Cycle 3 goals for Dallas in the community and in the communications industry, is there a place for computer literacy focused on by this group, or computer awareness?
Yeah, I should think that if I were in this context, if I were creating one of the goals for Dallas, I think that one of the goals, I would say that one of the goals for Dallas would be that all of our young people in our school systems, and those even who have gone beyond the school system, should have at least an opportunity, at least an option to become computer literate. That we, I don't know what the numbers are here, but in all of the United States, only 10% of the schools even have one computer. We're even behind Great Britain in this regard. And I think that some sort of framing of the goal of computer literacy would be an important one among the array of goals for Dallas.
Okay, are the cordless microphones available out there somewhere?
Here's one.
I'm going to start from my left, and there'll be one available on each aisle, I'm told, or the person will work across. Is there anyone in this section over here who'd like to make a comment right down here?
There's a lot of concerns in the headlines yesterday about mediocrity in education, but it's been said that a community gets the quality of education that the community deserves.
Amen.
Yes, and my question is, the facts here in Dallas are that frankly there's a lot more excitement and a lot more enthusiasm over the victory of a football team than there is over academic excellence. Our daily press, rarely, if ever, says anything about academics. And my question to you is, do you know of any community in this country that has raised itself by its educational bootstraps? And if you do, how did they do it? And what is the future? Is it a voucher? Is it private schools with a voucher system? Are the public schools dead? Or what do you see in the future of education?
Well, there's a reprivatization that's going on in the educational system in this country. There's no question about that. And it's because parents are taking their kids out of public schools and putting them in private schools. Now, we've been doing that for a long time. And about 3 years ago, I guess about 4 years ago now, the transcending reason for that shifted from racial to quality of education. There was a long period when most of the parents were taking their kids out, were taking them out for racial reasons. But that changed a number of years ago, and their parents, black, white, brown, were taking their kids out of the public schools and putting them in private schools because considerations of quality. And I think that that's going to continue, unless there's reform, and that's kind of forcing reform. I think and I also think our companies and corporations are going to have to, as a cost of doing business, do even more training and retraining in this country. I think the voucher system sort of fits with a lot of trends and would work, and I think California may be the first state of consequence to try that. And I think in connection with the voucher system, we have to remember that the most widespread, most successful experiment after one started public education in this country that occurred in the United States was in fact the voucher system. And that of course was the GI Bill after World War II, and you just cash in your voucher virtually anywhere you wanted. And I think that's in tune with a lot of things, and it may go that way. But a lot of states are already begun to do a lot of things. Some states won't do anything. Now, in connection with your thing about the Cowboys, if you were talking about the Cowboys, and education, high school football too as well. It is a question of values. You do get what you want. I took a shot at lawyers earlier, and I don't retract it. But in Japan has an extraordinarily good educational system. In this country, I think it's scandalous, I know alone, but that we have 20 million or 30 million functionally illiterate people. That is just outrageous. The Japanese, almost everyone is literate, and one of the things about the Japanese that I like the statistic I like is that, they have about 10,000 lawyers, and they got a population half of ours. They got about 15 million people. We have 600,000 lawyers. But the one I like tells us that in Japan, there are 10,000 lawyers. For every lawyer in Japan, there are 37 teachers of flower arranging. It's a question of values,
Any questions here on the left? Here we go, right down.
Thank you. In relation to your comment on institutional help shifting to self-help, we have, it's reported in Dallas, approximately 3,000 service providers of some form or fashion, running about a $2 billion a year budget. How do you see this shift impacting provision of human service to human beings in terms of quality of life over the next 20 to 30 years?
I'm not sure I quite get the question. Do I think that will increase, or what? Or
As
the quality will...
As the shift occurs from institutional to self-help, how do you see human service provision in a community changing?
Well, I think the shift is more to personal responsibility. And let me give you an example. And the most dramatic example is I said we turned our health over to the medical establishment. We're sort of medical establishment. We're reclaiming that. And much of this started in the bellwether state of California with the granola ethic, and with people really getting interested in nutrition and what we put in their bodies. And one of the most impressive changes in lifestyle I've seen in my lifetime is the physical fitness, really taking care of our bodies. 30 million people getting up and running every morning. Try to do that top down. And it's sort of reclaiming personal responsibility. Instead of turning the responsibility for our health and well-being over to the medical establishment, we reclaim it and we are personally responsible. So I want to emphasize that when we're going from institutional self-help, it's going to personal responsibility, and that includes from local institutions to self-help as well as from national and state institutions to self-help.
We have one last question over in this section. Here we go.
Yes, John agreed with many of the things that you had to say, but one question I think needs to be asked and addressed here in Dallas, the all-American city, is that the new economy ignores the poor and disenfranchised people, of which we have a large body even in this city. And I'm wondering how this new economy is going to impact them. Are they going to be left out as in the old economy?
Well, what's happening to, I would say there are three, sort of in terms of our human resources, and if I may, I will make this the last question. In terms of our human resources, there are at least three areas that we've really got to attend to as a society. There's the whole disenfranchised area that you talk about, where many people don't have the skills even for the old economy, let alone for the new economy. There are the people who are skilled in the old economy, but now are losing jobs and they've got to be retrained for the new economy. And there's our aging population. Those are the three areas, it seems to me, that as a society we really have to attend to. On the retraining side, what's going to happen, much of what's going to happen is already happening. There are formerly unemployed auto workers from Flint and Detroit and steel workers from Pittsburgh who are now living in Houston and Dallas and San Antonio and San Diego and Tampa and have gotten in other lines of work. There are also unemployed automobile workers still in Flint and Detroit and steel workers in Pittsburgh who are still there waiting for their company to call them back to work because their company says they're going to and the unions say they're going to, and they're not going to because autos and steel are not really coming back in any significant way as we transition out of those. So that we have to attend to retraining those people, and about 17 states so far, in one degree or another, have new training programs that are cranking up, especially outstandingly California. We're going to have to deal with the disenfranchised, but one of the and the older citizens. But one of the things that I think is important to notice is that we're coming to what I call the end of denial. Because for a long time we denied that our industrial base was going away. And when you don't think it's going away, and when you think it's coming back, you can say to the unemployed automobile workers, just wait, it'll come back, and then you get your jobs back. But if you cease to deny the industrial base going away, then you can put your energies into doing something about retraining, doing something about disenfranchising, to do something about these problems, which are the really crunchy problems of the society. But I truly do not think they will be attended to, and I think we've been instructed by the last 2 decades in this regard. I truly don't think they'll be attended to by some swell program out of Washington. I think that we have to take that responsibility. We, in our local communities and states, have to be responsible for that and have to assert leadership in that regard. Lastly, let me just say in a more upbeat note that I think the United States of America is the best positioned country in the world for the new economy and the new global economy. It's very fashionable to look at Japan, and let me look at it in the regard that I'm going to talk about it. Japan is superb, evidently, at hardware, and making hardware better and making it very high quality. Japan is also a monolithic society. One race, one culture, one history. They understand, as we do not, how limiting that is. When they look at us and see the richness of our mix, it's just incredible. Our human resources, we often talk about our physical resources in this country, but our great thing in this country is our human resources. We have the most fantastic mix of ethnic groups and racial groups and global experience. Sometimes when I get a little chauvinistic or a little jerked around too much by the Japanese experience, I point out that it is not by chance that the United States has produced 99 Nobel Prize winners and the Japanese 2. It's because of the richness of our mix. When you have a rich mix of this kind, that yields creativity, that yields innovation, and we are wonderfully good at software. And this whole new economy, among other things, is starting to be driven not by the hardware side, but by the software side. And we are extremely good at that, and we ought to attend to that, and I think we'll be just fine.
John, you were preoccupied there when John Lewis stepped up and handed me a note that we had worked a little flexibility into our planning. Tomorrow we've set up a special session for you and the attorneys in the group.
Thanks a lot. Well, I got some flower arrangers that I'll bring along.
As we prepared for this third cycle for Goals for Dallas, our chairman, Tommy Thompson, reminded us that what we need is a common vision of the community that's firmly based on the present as well as the future needs of its citizens. I think we've made a good beginning tonight as we seek to focus on this vision, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I want to thank you again, John, and thank the panelists, and thank each of you for taking your Thursday evening. We'll adjourn to the reception. There'll be some volunteers to direct you. 8:20 in the morning is starting time. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. I think I can never say that.
The purpose of the symposium is to permit in a roundtable discussion you to pose your concerns to our principal speakers, Pastora Cafferty, George Morrissey, John Naisbitt, and Michael LeBeouf. Let's commence with the first question, which is addressed to George Morrissey. As citizens, we are coming together in the Goals for Dallas program for the entire city. Do you feel it is realistic or appropriate for us to try to set specific deadlines or budget limitations when these goals are set? Or should we simply state our desired goals and then worry about cost or time later?
Okay, I think there are two dimensions of that. I think when we're talking about establishing the overall goal of direction, I think probably it is not terribly useful at that stage to try to deal with specific deadlines and costs. I'm not even sure we can really identify them at that point. Where it becomes critical is when we get to the operational level. When you break it down to the particular individual organizations or individual people who have to carry out portions of it, that's where I think it becomes crucial to start thinking about deadlines and costs. And I think this is the way we can begin to integrate it into the rest of the process so that we can make sure that all of the pieces come together. My concern is if we think only in generalities and never get to the point of making specific commitments, then I think we've got some real problems in trying to achieve something. I think is what Ms. Mager said this morning, that the fact that they had a 6-month deadline to get something done gave them a chance to get something done. I think we all have a tendency to do that. So I think where it's crucial is when it comes to the operational side of it, where we try to get the actions done.
John, do you see a relationship between the decline of public education and the decline of the work ethic? Is there a causal relationship?
I don't think there's a decline in the work ethic. So I think the work ethic has changed and is different character. Just as I talked about last night, we have a different character of leadership, local rather than national in this country. So I don't really associate the two, except that I think that in the educational area, and again I'll repeat because some of you weren't here what I said last night about that, and I think that it's not only, the other 17 hours a day that the child spends is very important, because I think for the last 2 decades that we've asked less and less of our students. All of us have asked less and less of our students, and they've given us less and less. And now that's one of the things we're really going to have to face up to. As far as the changing work ethic, the values changed about 2 decades ago, over particularly the period of the 60s, but nothing was done about it. But now with because you get change when you get a confluence of changing values and economic necessity, and now we've got the crunchy economic necessity of having to compete globally, I expect that we will have a lot of change in the factory floor and the office floor and the shop floor, as well as change for the same reasons in our educational system. But this is all part of this incredible transition period that we're going through, where everything is changing.
On that, Dr. Cafferty, in the book Possible Dreams on page 325 is set forth a goal concerning strengthening the family unit. Could you comment on how full participation and dignity in the community of gay citizens does not conflict with that stated goal?
Welcome to the frying pan.
Sure. I don't see it in conflict, frankly. First of all, I think to define a family unit as a nuclear family unit is a terribly narrow definition, and indeed a very modern Western definition. I do not pretend to be the least bit knowledgeable about the gay world, but I do know that any individual in our society, no matter what his preferences, her preferences are, is worthy of support, of treatment with dignity as a human being, and of respect. And I see none of those values in conflict with the family unit. I do not believe that if an individual is held to a standard of self-worth and is provided with dignity in the role he is playing in the community, that cannot help but straighten community, strengthen it and help it, and at the same time have that individual contribute. I suspect that if a man or a woman is gay, he or she is still a daughter, a brother,
a sister, a friend, a lover, and that's what families are about. I see no conflict whatsoever. I see a great deal of conflict when we cease to respect individual values. In history, the family has declined in relationship to lack of respect for individual worth. It doesn't happen the other way around.
Any other comments? This question is addressed to the panel in general. There's a general question and then a specific example. The question is, at what point should a goal be abandoned? Then the specific example cited is this. The Town Lake project or concept has,
here we go.
has been soundly defeated in a bond election. And it seems to be unpopular with a majority of Dallasites who are concerned about the high cost of construction and water quality. Is it appropriate to press this matter after it has been defeated at the polls? It's a good question here. At what point should a goal be abandoned? Who would like to comment on that? George?
I'll be glad. Are we on here yet? Are we here? Okay, fine. I think a goal should be abandoned when the people who are concerned about it see it as no longer meeting a need. And I think somebody once said that unrealistic goals, like dead horses, should be buried with the least dispatch. And I think there does come a time with any kind of a goal where you have to make that kind of a decision. I am certainly not competent to make any comments regarding Town Lake per se. I can deal only in generalities at that stage, but we do sometimes see a provision where people get a sort of a sense of ownership on something, where they perceive that it's almost like a bulldog, where they feel the need to continue on with something just because they've made a commitment to it. I think a part of the planning process says that periodically we have to stop and reassess the decisions that we have made, and reassess them in terms of current circumstances, which may be different from what they were at the time that they were originally set. Drawing the analogy more to the corporate world rather than the community world, one of the problems that we find with the implementation of MBO in many organizations is a fear on the part of many people that once they set an objective, that it is then cast in concrete and they're going to have to live with it forever and amen. I make the prediction that whatever objectives an individual sets at the beginning of a measurement period will not be identical with what's going to happen at the end of that measurement period, that there will be some changing circumstances. And the fact that somebody makes a decision along the way that what we originally thought was a worthwhile goal no longer is as worthwhile as it once was in view of changing circumstances, and that we then decide to make a shift in a different direction, I think is perfectly valid. I have no problem with anybody shifting directions, provided there's a valid reason for doing it and that they have a clear understanding that it is happening. Unfortunately, we find that in so many cases we just kind of blow in the wind. And I think we need to be able to say, that's why I feel taking a look at the cost, not only dollar cost, but also emotional investment and everything else. There does come a time when we have to say it's a diminishing return. And that's a judgment call, and I know of no formula that's going to tell you exactly when to make that.
But George, let me be a little more cosmic about it. How many of you seen the film Gandhi? Now, let us suppose Gandhi had decided that he wasn't getting all support. I mean, there's certain causes, like, let me suggest, no matter how discouraged I would become about ending nuclear arms, it seems to me that that's something that you continue to appoint even beyond exhaustion. So I think that some of the larger, more cosmic issues, we just simply have to continue to work on.
I hope Dallas doesn't have a nuclear arsenal. I was just going to comment on that I assume and hope anyway that somewhere in the Goals for Dallas program there is a mechanism to periodically evaluate not only progress to goals, but to evaluate whether a goal is still necessary. Because as you said, I think goals should be written, but they should be written in sand and not carved in stone.
John Naisbitt, there has frequently been an expressed fear or resentment that the growth of special interest groups in our city represents a threat to or fragmentation of progress for our city. Do I understand you correctly that you feel that such diversity is both healthy and desirable and a natural characteristic of the coming age?
I think it is the good news, and I think it's more than the characteristic of the coming age. I think it's a characteristic of America. And I think we only have to go back to the Federalist Papers, where the debate was made there, where they called it factionalism. And in the end, in that brilliant paper, number 10, I believe, where Madison argued that in the kind of free society that we want, we will have factionalism. When you have, and then he went on to say, not only when you have liberty do you have factionalism, but he said, factionalism is a necessary condition for liberty. And I think you only have to contrast the United States in this regard with the Soviet Union to understand that.
I think I obviously agree with that. I'd like to add, I think...
I'm being cosmic again.
Yes, I like your being cosmic. You're terrific. I'd like to add, I think repeatedly those of us who are trying to get things done, and that's everyone here, gets exasperated with the press for being negative. And let me sort of associate our criticism of the press in a sense with the popular criticism of public interest groups. I think the press being negative is a very important role. It's a good role in our society. It is what makes us different from those countries that don't have a free press. It is not news that I ate well today. It is news if I starve to death. And that is the role of the press. I sleep much better at night, although sometimes I get very exasperated when my pet project is the one that's destroyed on the editorial page. Because there is a press out there that disagrees, that investigates, and that is negative. That is its role. I would not buy newspapers to tell me that everybody in Dallas eats well, sleeps well, and is very jolly and happy. I buy them to find out who isn't. And nobody else is going to play that role in our society and make it profitable besides. That's the role of the press.
Now you're being cosmic.
Now I'm being cosmic, but I get a little bit concerned when I see the press as the bad guy in our society, because I would suggest to you it is the good guy.
Amen.
Michael LeBoeuf, could you comment on this? What is the single most important point that needs to be put to the community to emphasize the importance of goal setting?
Well, I think basically it gets back to that quote I used this morning. It said you've removed most of the roadblocks to success in this world, whether you're an individual or a community, when you learn the difference between motion and direction. And I think if there's another vehicle other than goals for doing that, I'd like to know about it.
Let me put one to George Morrissey. Is there amongst our many goal subjects one or two or a few that are key to all the others? In other words, is there a set of trigger goals that everything else depends on?
Citizen involvement. I think the involvement of people in anything, and I don't care whether you're talking about building buildings, developing parks, creating educational opportunities. I think it's the actual involvement of people. People want to be involved, and I think we need to look for opportunities to allow them to get involved and to encourage involvement at that stage. And I think we have fallen down on our job when we really don't tap into that marvelous source of energy that we've got out there. And I think if that was the one thing, I would say I would like to see every community organization really looking for an opportunity to get a heavier level of involvement from the community.
Okay. George, I was going to say, George, do you mean involvement or do you mean commitment?
The question was, do I need involvement or commitment? I guess I see the two as being very closely related. But commitment is, I agree. But you got to be involved before you can get committed.
Well, one of the things that came to mind when you said that was I heard a story that said the kamikaze pilot who flew 30 missions was involved, but he wasn't committed. You know? There are a lot of people that are very involved, but sometimes when it gets down to time to do things, they're just involved.
They say the hen is involved in breakfast, but the pig is committed.
Exactly. Okay, very good.
Pastor Cafferty, what are the most likely areas of conflict of which we should be wary in the goal-setting process?
That's an easy one, I think, to answer. Generally, that's the whole struggle between development and conservation of everything. I mean, whether it's a conservation of green space, the conservation of existing housing, conservation of any even existing values. And that is not to say that conservation is a good thing and development is a bad thing. To conserve some things is bad, it's foolish. To conserve for the sake of preserving the past is the worst kind of antiquarianism, and no community can afford that. On the other hand, development, it is not always good. I might as well jump into a controversy because I'm going home tonight, so I don't have to deal with this. But I keep reading about development around your airport of residential housing. And I live in an area which certainly has developed around the airport a great deal, with some good and some bad results. I don't know the particulars. I don't know how much you can insulate noise out here, but let me say that the fact that you're questioning it was very reassuring to me every time I picked up a Dallas newspaper and saw this. Not because development is bad, but it's again questioning what kind, whether it's residential, whether it's industrial. You're going into a rapid transit system. I happen to think that transit is the most important thing you can do in any community because it sets the pattern of community development for the next 100 years. On the other hand, transit is the most disruptive public project, short of perhaps a major highway system, that you will have in any community. Balancing off what you want to keep and what you're willing to sacrifice for the present and for the future is where the conflicts are going to rise. They will not be solved easily. If you do not address them and solve them, however, somebody else will have to. All you're doing is postponing, I think, in any community when you refuse to make those choices. The choices have to be made, and once they have been made, you have to abide by them for a while. That doesn't mean your children and grandchildren can't turn it around, or even you 20 years from now. But any large capital project makes those kind of choices. To make them badly will make Dallas a lesser city today and a much lesser city tomorrow. To make them right makes that progress that you have charted unlimited.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you offer a little round of applause and appreciation for all of our panelists?
The presentations you have just seen were made at a preparatory conference in April of 1983 that kicked off a new Goals for Dallas process for the Dallas area. For more information about Goals for Dallas and how you can become part of it, call 741-1738.